A wave of anti-China sentiment is spreading across the globe.
It's probably the largest internment of
the Chinese government in intimidating Chinese Australians.
Who is behind this anti-China propaganda?
It's naive to think that think tanks exist only for the pursuit of truth.
It has become a major source and proponent of anti-China propaganda.
Propaganda definitely is a natural component of any media. They have their point of views first, and then they pick up every materials.
It is a complete marketing con to describe anything as being independent unless it is crowdfunded.
On 2790, heavy traffic no factor at church. Depart immediately.
Tensions rise in the South China Sea. With tit-for-tat rhetoric and military posturing, China and the U.S. seem to be heading toward a showdown.
We're looking at TikTok. We may be banning TikTok. We may be doing some other things.
What comes along with the tension is fear-mongering.
The Chinese Communist Party may know where your children are.
Been banned now by India, and Australia is considering.
A wave of anti-China sentiment spreads across the globe. A closer look finds an intricate network of think tanks, politicians, and media in driving the wave.
SPI has released a report claiming that a campaign of Chinese Twitter accounts.
You are from ASPI.
ASPI is behind the hacking claims.
Often cited by media outlets as an independent policy institute, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, ASPI, is precisely the opposite. The Canberra-based institute has become a go-to think tank for many Western media outlets in terms of framing the public's understanding and attitude toward China. Senior officials in Australia have long expressed their concerns about the hawkish nature of ASPI research.
There are hawks intent on fighting a new Cold War. They have waged a muttering campaign against collaborations with China, and it's found eager acolytes in sections of the Australian media.
ASPI began taking an ever-increasing profile on what I call the so-called China threat in Australia.
The ASPI, ever since it has been set up, endless litany of pro-American literature that it gets published, particularly in the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, which is our government-run news service. They are very integral in the anti-China sentiment that you see in Australia.
ASPI has been able to establish itself in a dominant position in shaping Australia's foreign policy towards China.
In 2019, ASPI launched the China Defense Universities Tracker, a project seeking to detect security threats that China supposedly poses. While nothing spooky about China has been found via this tracker, one spook is in sight.
But what is clear is that the source of the funding. Now, ASPI acknowledges that it's the United States Defense Department, the United States State Department, this Global Engagement Centre. The Global Engagement Centre coordinator is one Miss Lee Gabriel. She's described on the website as, in that United States website, as a former US Navy fighter pilot who later trained with the CIA and was assigned to the Defence Intelligence Agency.
What's particularly concerning about ASPI is that ASPI not only gets funding from the Australian government, it gets funding from the US government, it gets funding from Taiwan, it gets funding from the Japanese, it also gets funding from the British.
A table from ASPI website shows for the financial year 2019 to 2020, U.S. State Department has entrusted ASPI to develop multiple research projects, including mapping China's technology giants amid the tensions between the two countries over the technology sector.
If you go to its website, you'll see most of the main representatives of the US industrial complex, or military industrial complex rather, Raytheon, Boeing, Westinghouse, the manufacturers of big arms are also big supporters of ASPI.
While think tanks like ASPI keep producing reports that serve the interests of their benefactors, their research has drawn criticism from both Australia and China.
We have repeatedly responded to the preposterously false reports on China compiled by this so-called institute. We hope and believe that Australia and other countries will be vigilant and distinguish right from wrong and reject the absurd fabrications by such anti-China organizations.
It's naive to think that think tanks exist only for the pursuit of truth. They exist to advocate a particular point of view.
Their research, their point of views is guided or dominated by certain kind of ideological attitude.
Adrian Zenz joins me now. He's a senior fellow in China studies.
The latest bill
Adrian Zenz keeps appearing on Western media as the expert on Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. But who is this expert? And how much credibility does his research have?
Adrian Zenz is a German so-called researcher who has suddenly come onto the scene and made himself a name in Washington among the elites and has become a major source and proponent of anti-China propaganda.
In September 2018, Zenz wrote an article in which he said that in Xinjiang, there may be more than 1 million people who are interred and being re-educated. He based this astonishing claim on a single report by Istigal TV, a Uyghur exile media organization based in Turkey. Without verifying his research, Western media gives Zenz's work on Xinjiang great play and undue credibility.
We're not sure if he's ever been to Xinjiang, let alone China, or even speaks Chinese. Because of his activities with the help of the United States government, he's gone from being a nobody to appearing at various think tanks, government institutions, and media outlets all over the world.
They have their point of views first, and then they pick up every materials, no matter where it comes from. Sometimes these guys, they're not doing research, they're doing propaganda.
On June 29th, researcher Adrian Zenz published a report accusing China of forcing Uyghur women in Xinjiang to be sterilized in order to limit the ethnic minority population. Later the same day, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo issued a statement citing this report and saying that the Chinese government is using forced sterilization in Xinjiang. This claim has been debunked by the Chinese Foreign Ministry.
During the 8-year span from 2010 to 2018, the population of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang had a 25% increase of 2.54 million. I must also point out, a lot of the materials used by the anti-China elements in some Western countries to smear and discredit China's policies on Xinjiang come from Adrian Zenz, a German scholar. Media has repeatedly disclosed Adrian Zenz is a key member of the Xinjiang Education and Training Center research group set up by the U.S. intelligence agency, making a living from fabricating rumors about Xinjiang and slandering China.
The real challenge is to which extent you can speak out the truth, to speak out what really happened inside China. It's not necessary for you to love China or like China, but if China do something white, you cannot say China do something black.
We're constantly hearing this in the West that the West promotes free speech and democracy, China, authoritarian dictatorship or whatever. Dissenting voices are marginalized and clearly now completely silenced all the time in the West. The Twitter, for instance, but when it comes to Twitter accounts that are ostensibly Chinese in our free speech society, thousands of them deleted.
China, Chinese, stop the Chinese.
As the election day in the U.S. draws closer, the Trump administration is finding think tanks a convenient platform to launch misinformation against China.
Confront China's malign behaviors.
The scope of the Chinese government's ambition.
Frankly, we've been slow to see the risk of China.
Someone like Vice President Pence or Pompeo using these institutes to provide a platform in which their views will not be challenged, but will be projected throughout the United States. For example, Vice President Pence gave that very important speech on China in October 2018.
As it conducted freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea.
Which really publicly set out the agenda. And he did that at the Hudson Institute. And of course, everyone in the Hudson Institute agrees with him.
From the other side, the think tanks and the research inside the think tanks need to get favor from these politicians so that they can continue to get their resources.
ASPI figures are regularly in the media. They work very, very closely with the Murdoch media in particular.
There's kind of partners working very closely to doing the same things. They try to, in certain ways, manipulate the information fellows so they can affect the people how to think issues.
Politicians, think tanks, and the media work together to align narratives that drive public discussion and pervade the public conscious, often with malevolent intent. First, so-called independent researchers or institutions release a report making groundless accusations against China. Then, certain Western politicians quickly follow up and make statements citing the report. Next, media outlets report the news widely. Last, certain Western governments take advantage of the media's leverage as tacit approval for further actions such as passing legislation to ratchet up pressure on China. Despite the hostility promoted by Western media and politicians, Chinese diplomats have gone out of their way to convey goodwill and cooperation.
We are always ready to develop a China-US relationship featuring no conflict, no confrontation, mutual respect, and win-win cooperation based on coordination and stability.
It's quite clear the global challenges we are faced with today are global in nature, and it requires global cooperation, and especially cooperation between our two great countries.
I think definitely there's something wrong, but there's something wrong inside the United States, not outside the United States.
The Australian government now is just a puppet of the US. So I don't think that it's particularly wise that we are arcing up with China.
China's been politically stable. It has contributed in many, many ways to regional peace and stability. So we should be very happy.
For generations, China and the West have worked together to advance relations. But some think tanks with insidious agendas are undermining the fruits of years of cooperation and goodwill, risking conflict and endangering stability and world peace.